So today we're tackling something pretty fundamental about how we communicate. We've got this stack of material analyses from psychology, business, negotiation, and it all points to something really counterintuitive. Basically, it challenges the idea that, talking more means winning more. Forget everything you think you know about winning arguments or influencing people with your words. What if the key to victory isn't about what you say, but what you don't?
Exactly. And that's really our mission here for you, the listener. We're digging into these sources that detail how mastering the art of holding back restraint can lead to much greater triumphs. We need to start seeing silence not as like an empty space or something awkward, but as a powerful presence, a deliberate tool.
Okay, right. Let's start with what feels like the core problem, this paradox of instant response. We're so conditioned now, aren't we? Email pings, read receipts. There's this expectation, almost a demand, for immediate reply. The second there's a gap in conversation.
You feel it, yeah,
Yeah.
that pressure to jump in. And that's the trap. Because speed is often the enemy of clarity, isn't it?
Yeah.
Our sources hammer this home again and again. This pressure, this sort of fear of the quiet,
Yeah.
it backfires. Quick answers, the ones fired off just to fill the void, they often lead to regret, miscommunication, just sloppy thinking, really.
We confuse being quick with being competent.
That's a great way to put it. We mistake responsiveness for competence.
Yeah.
And, a lot of the material points out that when we feel that pressure, we rush. We add qualifiers. We explain ourselves again. We basically dilute our own message just to avoid maybe 2 or 3 seconds of quiet. The moment you start doing that, negotiating against yourself, you've just handed over your power.
Oh, absolutely. I see that in meetings all the time. Someone will make a really strong point, and then before anyone can even digest it, they jump back in with, but that's just my first thought. Maybe we could also.
Exactly. They rush in to rescue everyone from the silence. But what they're really doing is undermining their own authority. Their own point gets lost.
So we really need to question that reflex. Why are we so quick to fill the silence? We assume it's bad, right? Like disagreement or awkwardness.
We do. But for the person who's using silence strategically, it means something totally different. It means they're gathering information, taking control, thinking.
Okay, so if the problem is that instant, often regrettable response, the solution has to be about being intentional, deliberate. Which brings us to this idea of the strategic pause. And this is where silence stops being passive and becomes, well, a weapon. Or maybe a tool.
A tool, definitely. A tool for leverage. It's not just about taking a breath. It's about consciously claiming that conversational space. Think about it. When you take just a 3, maybe 5-second pause before answering a tough question or reacting to a big demand, what does that signal?
Confidence, control, like you're not flustered.
Precisely. It signals profound self-possession. You look composed. And that translates directly into perceived authority. The sources are really clear on this. Rushing makes you look defensive, maybe unprepared, reactive. But holding that space, taking that moment, shows you're weighing things, considering, not just blurting something out.
Okay, let's talk specifics. Where does this really play out?
High-stakes negotiations are a classic example. Imagine someone makes you an offer, a significant one. If you just pause deliberately, you force them to sit with the uncertainty. They start wondering, did I offer too little? Was that the wrong thing to say? That silence can actually compel them to start negotiating against themselves in their own head. They might even sweeten the pot before you said a single word back.
That's powerful. But hang on, what about different cultures? I mean, is this universal in, say, Western business? Okay, a pause might signal authority, but I'm thinking of some Asian cultures where maybe a long silence could feel, I don't know, disrespectful, or like you're slow on the uptake.
That's a really important point. And the sources do address this nuance. It's not necessarily about a long pause everywhere. The duration is definitely culturally dependent, but the intent behind it, that seems universal. So in a culture where long silences aren't the norm, the strategic pause might just be, say, 1 second longer than usual, just that tiny bit extra. But it's still enough to signal, hold on, I'm processing this, I'm considering.
Yeah.
It shows you're not just reacting on autopilot. The key is the intentionality, not hitting some specific stopwatch time.
Okay, that makes sense. Intentionality over duration. And you see this in public speaking too, right? That pause just before the big reveal or after a really impactful story.
Oh, absolutely. It's like a spotlight. Like you said, it focuses everyone's attention. Neurologically, it actually builds anticipation. There's a slight tension. You're basically training the audience that the words coming next are important, worth waiting for. It gives your statement more weight, more gravity.
Okay, so we've got the pause, which is about timing and impact within a conversation. But what about taking it further, like total non-response, strategic inaction. The sources suggest there's real power, especially in competitive situations, in just letting the other side show their cards first.
Yes, moving beyond the pause to deliberate non-response.
Mm.
This is where silence can speak incredibly loudly. Think about business strategy. A major competitor launches something new. The knee-jerk reaction is often to immediately issue a press release, announce your own counter-move.
Right? Fight fire with fire.
But what if you just stay silent, strategically silent? You force them to own their launch completely, the bugs, the market reaction, the questions, without you validating it or even giving them an opponent to define themselves against. Your apparent indifference, your focused non-response, it can imply their move isn't really a threat or isn't worth your immediate energy. It often makes the other party feel like they're shouting into a void. They might keep talking, maneuvering, trying to provoke any reaction, and potentially overextend themselves or make mistakes out of frustration.
You definitely see that play out in politics sometimes. The side that holds back, lets the other side spend all their energy first, can sometimes look more measured, more in control later on.
Exactly. But this is where we need to tread carefully, especially when we bring this into personal relationships, because there's a huge, crucial difference we need to draw here.
Okay.
It's the difference between using silence as healthy detachment versus using it as passive aggression. The intent is everything.
Ah, right. Explain that difference.
Okay, so healthy detachment. That's deciding consciously not to engage in something destructive or pointless. Like, say, someone leaves a nasty baiting comment online. Healthy detachment is ignoring it. You refuse to give them the reaction they want. It's self-protective. You maintain your own clarity. The silence serves a constructive purpose, preserving your peace or focus.
Okay, makes sense.
Versus passive aggression. That's when you use silence as a weapon to punish someone or manipulate them or dodge responsibility. Your partner asks a reasonable question about finances, and you respond with the silent treatment, deliberately making them feel ignored, anxious, or guilty. That's not strategic. That's harmful. It erodes trust. The sources are very clear. Strategic silence aims for clarity, leverage, maybe de-escalation. It's never about being emotionally cruel or manipulative. The motive behind the silence is the key distinction.
That's a really vital point. It brings ethics into it. Strategy, yes, but mindful strategy. So if we understand the power and the potential pitfalls, how do we actually get better at this? How do we move from being, reactive talkers to cultivating this mindful muteness?
Well, it takes practice, conscious effort. It's like building any other skill or muscle. The sources suggest some really practical techniques, often borrowing from mindfulness. One I liked is called anchor and assess. So when you hear something that triggers that immediate urge to jump in, maybe you feel defensive or attacked or even overly excited.
That emotional spike.
Exactly, that spike. The first step is to anchor yourself physically for just a second. Focus on something tangible, like the feeling of your feet on the floor or your hands resting on the table, just a brief physical check-in. That tiny action creates a micropause. It interrupts that knee-jerk verbal reaction pathway. And in that micropause, you assess briefly what's really happening. What's the best response, not just the fastest? It forces a little gap between the stimulus and your response.
Anchor and assess. I like that. Simple, actionable. And are there specific situations, trigger moments we should be particularly watchful for? Where are we most likely to mess this up?
Definitely. They usually involve that high emotional arousal. Psychologists sometimes call it an amygdala hijack. Situations where you feel personally attacked, criticized, misunderstood, or even situations where you get suddenly really enthusiastic about an idea and want to just gush without thinking. Anytime you feel that strong emotional pull, defensiveness, anger, even intense excitement, that's your cue. That's the moment the urge to speak now is probably strongest and potentially most detrimental. Our need to immediately justify ourselves or seize the moment verbally is often the biggest enemy of thoughtful silence.
So it's about shifting from being like a reaction machine driven by anxiety or impulse to being more of a response architect, someone driven by purpose. That sounds, frankly, a bit exhausting at first.
It can feel like it initially, sure, because it requires overriding ingrained habits. But the sources are pretty adamant about the long-term payoff. It's significant. First, your reputation changes. You start being seen as someone who doesn't just talk for the sake of it. Your words carry more weight because they're perceived as more considered and more necessary. You stand out from the noise.
Less noise, more signal.
Exactly. And second, and maybe this is the most important part, it genuinely strengthens relationships, both personal and professional. When you stop rushing into knee-jerk reactions and potential misunderstandings, and instead you listen, you pause, you respond with intention, You build trust. You build respect. Communication actually becomes clearer.
Okay, so summing this up, silence isn't empty. It's a tool, a dynamic tool for getting leverage, achieving clarity, making sure your words actually land with impact. It seems the less you rely on just volume or speed, the more power your actual words have when you do choose to speak.
That's the core idea, making your utterance count.
All right, so here's a challenge for you listening this week. Try experimenting with this. Find just one situation, maybe a discussion at work, conversation with family, where you feel that urge to jump in. And consciously use that anchor and assess idea. Wait, just say 3 seconds longer than you normally would before speaking. Just observe. See what happens. Notice how the other person reacts. Notice how you feel. Does your perspective shift even slightly in that gap?
Yeah, try it out. And that leads us to our final thought for you to chew on, building on all this. If silence really is this powerful presence, this tool for impact, how often does your own need to speak, to fill the space immediately, actually diminish your presence? Think about that inverse relationship. Maybe less talking, strategically deployed, actually equals more authority, more impact, something to consider as you navigate your week.